let me introduce the first two speakers. Carter Berg is a current master's student in history at Montana State University. His interest is in the conservation of lands of the American West. His interest in the conservation of the lands of the American West emerged from growing up and interacting with the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Carter's current research is centered on the material roots of the wilderness ideal in the GYE and how the concept of wilderness has and continues to influence resource management practices in the region. And Victoria Nelson is pursuing a master's degree in history at MSU. She graduated from MSU with a BA in environmental studies and minors in Hispanic studies and history in 2021. She is particularly interested in the history of public lands and land management, especially as it pertains to wildfire management. So, without further ado, here's Carter and Victoria.
Hello, I'm Carter.
I'm Victoria.
Yeah, we're both history graduate students from Montana State University, part of the History and Philosophy Department. And today we're going to be talking about Bozeman's M. We're really happy to be doing this presentation at the Montana Historical Conference, just because I'm sure many of you guys are aware of Bozeman's M. I'm sure a lot of you have even hiked the M. It's one of the most prominent features of the Bridger Mountain Range in the Gallatin Valley. When I first moved to Montana from Wisconsin when I was 5 years old, hiking the M was one of the first things that we did. I looked at some old family photo albums, and it was in that first week that we made it to Bozeman that we had to take some time away from moving into our new home and going up to hike the M. When people come to town, it's something that you have to show them. But somehow over the years, after the hiking the M dozens of times, I never really questioned the origins of this physical feature. I never really questioned why it even exists. But last year we got the opportunity to do just that in our historic preservation class. This was a graduate level class taught by Dr. Janet Orr. The university reached out to Dr. Orr with an opportunity for our class to engage in the M project. Right now, Montana State University is trying to consider what the future of the M should look like in the 21st century. And obviously, an essential part of trying to consider the M's future is reflecting on its past. And Dr. Orr, being the amazing teacher that she is, signed us on for the project. And our class was tasked with producing a report that would determine whether or not the M is eligible for inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places. And this was really an amazing opportunity for our class to engage in a real practical project. As graduate students, our classes can really get bogged down by esoteric theory. So this was a good opportunity for us to get on the ground and actually look at something real. And our class had both architects and historians. We're both historians, but it was really fun to work with the architects because we were talking about a built physical feature on the landscape. Our class, when approaching the project, we realized that the M has multiple meanings, but one of the primary ways that we've tried to conceptualize the history of the M was its contribution to the social and cultural history of Montana State College and Montana State University. And our class really found that during the college's early years and its fledgling years, the M played a crucial part in shaping campus culture and in Montana State College's identity. The college in its early years was trying to figure out what it wanted to be, and we thought that the M helped in this process. But if we want to understand the history of the M, we need to zoom out and try to view the Gallatin Valley in its broader context. We know that for thousands of years, the Gallatin Valley was used by numerous indigenous groups, each with their own unique relationship with the valley and its resources. It has multiple indigenous names, such as Many Come Together Country and the Valley of the Flowers. It was a gathering place for trade, seasonal hunting, and ceremonial activities. And it was a neutral territory, largely throughout the many years of use. But this all changed in the late 19th century with the arrival of large settler populations in the valley. The 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty formalized the first major boundary definitions for tribal territories in the region, and a series of subsequent treaties, congressional legislation, and Supreme Court cases throughout the late 19th century moved indigenous communities in Montana onto reservations. And it's important to note that Montana State University today would not exist without the dispossession of the region's indigenous peoples. The 1862 Morrill Act established agricultural colleges, and it took unceded land and allotted them for the construction of these colleges. It also made the system of state trust lands, which provides funding for public universities like Montana State University. So in this context, we can see that that the end and that Montana State University was trying to figure itself out, and throughout the nation, I'll slow down. The act also created the state endowment system today. So by the time the Agricultural College is established in 1893, Montana had only been a state for 4 years. Early in the state's history, settlers were still trying to figure out exactly what Montana really was. So they were renaming and remapping geographical features throughout the state. And we found that in this context, the M can really be seen as part of a larger trend of developing state and college identity in its early fledgling years. And we can see that the college was trying to identify itself and define itself during this period. In 1912, its name changed from the Montana Agricultural College to the Montana State College. So it's moving from an agricultural identity to a more broad collegiate general identity. And in the same year, students voted to change the college's athletic emblem from an A to an M. So they're moving away from being the Aggies. And this is from the 1912 Exponent. The Exponent is the student newspaper, and we'll reference it a lot in this presentation. And only 3 years later, after the emblem change, we see the construction of the M. It was constructed by the second generation of Montana's early white settlers. And construction began in October 1915, and it was an initiative of the sophomore class of 1915, which would go on to graduate in 1918. It was 5 sophomore boys who went up in October 1915 and surveyed and staked out the M. And it's a massive letter. It's a 237 by 103 foot grid that it was built on. They wanted to make it that large so it could be seen from campus 5 miles away. On October 25th, 1915, the class of 1918 went out, and they actually built the letter using rocks from the surrounding hillside on Mount Baldy. So they were moving limestone in. They quickly ran out of rocks surrounding the letter, so they had to build a human fire line to move more rocks in. And it's massive. It has a surface area of 16,500 square feet. But they didn't finish the letter on October 25th. Their intention was to go up and whitewash it so it could be really bright and seen from campus. They were going to use lime and water to bleach the letter. So they returned in the spring. On May 8th, 1916, the sophomore class went up and finished the letter. This time they brought litters to help them carry the rocks, so it wasn't just a fire line operation. And the students were really proud of this letter. In the student newspaper, they claimed that it was the biggest letter of its type in the world. It wasn't. It wasn't the biggest letter of its type in the world. But I think it's important to consider the symbolism of placing this letter on this hill in a time of the assimilation era in Montana, as Montana is trying to define its culture, and it's largely a settler culture, putting this M up on that mountain just decades after indigenous ties to the valley had been severed. But in the early years of the college, students were trying to determine what the college truly was. And we found that constructing the M was a central piece in a deliberate effort to invent traditions that would unite students and create a cohesive college culture. So there's no precedent for these types of traditions. They emerge kind of out of nowhere, fully fledged. And the push to enforce these traditions began before the M. So on campus, freshman students would have to wear greenies to show that they were new to campus. They were essentially fresh meat. So restoring the M became one of these invented traditions. In the 1918 yearbook, as students recounted the construction of the M, they said that the construction was a token of love for their college. As they did it, they sang praises to the MSC, the Montana State College. So they saw construction as part of their Montana identity and their pride in their school. Just 12 years later, after the construction of the M in the student newspaper, students said that restoring the M was a grand old tradition. It had just been going on for a decade at that point, but it was a tradition to them, and it was essential to their college experience. And student groups played an essential role in M Day. In 1920, college administrators created the Septemviri, which was a group of 7 male senior students selected for good character each year. The group's explicit purpose was to perpetuate, create, and govern the customs and traditions of the Montana State College. In 1921, incoming freshmen were given a brochure that outlined the customs and traditions that all students were expected to take part in. And it set aside October 12th as M Day, and it was official campus holiday to go up and restore the M and have a picnic or a party afterwards. So from this point onward, the M Day became an official campus tradition. And the Septemviri weren't the only student group that were involved in M Day. From the beginning, the Spurs and the Fangs were also deeply involved. The Spurs were a women's service organization on campus. The Fangs were a male student service organization, and they had chapters throughout the nation. And just like how these two groups were separated based upon gender, participation in M Day really was separated on gendered lines. So it was the Fangs, it was the male students that were going up and actually re-rocking the letter and liming it. And it was the Spurs, they set up refreshment stands along the way to the letter. They also set up a refreshment stand at the base, and they'd sell baked goods to the local community to fund the effort to restore the letter. So while the Septemviri really publicized and enforced the tradition, it was the Spurs and the Fangs who were on the ground actually implementing the tradition. And M-Day activities really followed a consistent ritual through the 1940s. It's important to note that students would get the day off. They had no classes on M-Day, which I'm sure really helped with participation. If the week before M-Day and the student exponent, they'd say on Wednesday next week we're going to have M-Day, and then on the day of, if the weather was bad, the campus steam whistle would blast at 6:30. It meant that classes were going to proceed as normal, which is a big bummer. If the campus whistle blasted at 7 a.m., it meant that M-Day was on. The students would meet at the Student Union Building, the sub, and they'd get bussed up to Mount Baldy. The night before, the Spurs and the Fangs would ask the local community to put out mops and buckets on their porches so they could go out in the morning and collect them for the M-Day restoration. So it was a community effort as well. After completing their work, it's typically around 1 p.m. in the afternoon, they'd have a picnic or a lunch at the fish hatchery. Some nights they'd have parties back on campus. And during the later years, the tradition expanded. They'd put flares along the M to outline it so they could see it in their work during their party. And Montana State University did that this week, actually, on Wednesday for homecoming. So these traditions still carry on till today. But taking part in M-Day was a responsibility for these students. And if they neglected their responsibility, they would face the judgment of the kangaroo court. There was a weird term to see in the archives. And it was an informal court made up of students, and they would essentially hand out punishments for not taking part in campus traditions. These punishments were largely symbolic, so it could be getting your hair cut in public, or could be getting your head dunked in the frog pond, which I assume is the duck pond today. But these courts, though informal, they show an effort to reinforce communal values on campus and create a Montana State College identity. By the 1960s, participation really dwindled in M-Day as students were kind of questioning these invented traditions. In the archives, we saw a lot of reports of hippies and cowboys fighting on campus, so that college identity was kind of being torn apart during these decades. In 1966, the faculty voted to cancel the spring M-Day. The Spurs and the Fangs, they protested this decision, but the gusto behind the movement had faded at that point. So what had once been a shared obligation to restore the M two times a year really faded away to spouts of sporadic volunteerism. You'd see a couple groups of students going up at irregular intervals to go and restore the M. So the M fell into disrepair. And I like these series of images because it shows kind of the environmental impact of M-Day. In 1920, you can see that's one of the earlier photos of the M. You can see that Mount Baldy is a clean kind of slope. In 1939, you can see that actually this is a picture from M-Day. The path that the students took up to get to the M was straight up. You can see the milk jugs that they used to carry lime in. And the photo from the 2000s, you can see the path that the students actually used during M-Day. It left a scar on the mountain. So by the 1990s, both the letter was in disrepair, and the actual hillside was eroded from all the work that had taken place on the M. Because of this, both community members, university officials, and alumni called for the restoration of the M. This effort was really spearheaded by an alumnus named Turleif Asheim. He had graduated from the Montana State College in 1937. And for him, he had remembered all these years, for the 4 years that he was on campus, taking part in M Day. And he saw rehabilitating the M, he saw it as an act of rejuvenating a symbol of belonging and identity that had become lost over the decades. And I think a lot of alumni agreed with him because they were really successful in their fundraising efforts to actually restore the M. It was a 3-year process of restoration in the late 1990s and early 2000s. They started with creating the trail system as we know it today, the easy, the intermediate, and the hard trail. And then they also revegetated the scar that went right up straight to the M. After completing the trail system, they moved on to the M itself. They created a viewing platform. They also installed rock gabion retaining walls to keep the M from sliding down the mountain. That had been the main problem throughout the years, the rocks falling off the M. And this time they asked the Montana State University football team to actually paint the M with white acrylic paint. So they moved away from lime to paint. And the M today is stabilized and restored. And it really retains its emblematic value as a signifier of Montana identity. In recent decades, school officials have pushed to bring back M Day. They actually held M Day when I was a student, a freshman at MSU. And they also every year take the M photo, where freshmen gather in the formation of our M because of its symbolic representation of Montana State University identity. So I think university officials and community leaders recognize the utility in fostering a unifying symbol for the campus and the larger community of Bozeman as a whole.
Hello, I'm Victoria. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit, and Carter just did a wonderful job explaining how we found significance in MSU's M through its connection to social and cultural history. And the second argument that we made in our class is that the M is actually significant through its design and its physical structure. So the physical construction of the M, I'm going to refer to it as a hillside letter, and I'm going to talk about hillside letters for the rest of the discussion, is actually reflective of a broader Western style of architecture and design. So you can see here, you might be wondering why there's a picture of Santa Claus, Indiana. Per the conversation over lunch, I am one of the people who moved to Montana for college. I hail from the town of Santa Claus, Indiana, which actually does exist. It's very small. But where I come from, we do not have hillside letters. This is definitely a Western thing for me. You can see we've got kind of an overhead view of Santa Claus. It's super flat. We don't have anywhere to put RSC. So hillside letters are definitely reflective of Western design, and Montana State's letter in particular is a reflective of a specific time period in that Western design history. So from 1905 to 1915, a majority of these hillside letters were built in the West. As Carter said, they were built as largely a part of a social and cultural movement, but it was also a design movement as well. So Bozeman's M, Carter said, was constructed fall 1915. So that falls within that decade of significance, 1905 to 1915. After receiving the first permit of its kind from the Forest Service, because the M actually sits on Gallatin National Forest land, so the MSC students had to get permission, they started the construction process in fall 1915. These, again, we've got some exponent clippings here. As we can see demonstrated by them, the students kind of planned their construction process around the materials that were available at the M. In this case, it was utilizing the rocks that were already existent on Mount Baldy's slope. So they physically built up the structure of the letter M using those rocks. This construction method is actually connected to construction methods within the West as well, so reflecting that larger design movement. Of all hillside letters built in the West, whether they were kind of from that most significant time period of 1905 to 1915, there's three main construction styles. So the first one is the most common one. It's the built-up method, just using rocks, wood, whatever you can find on the landscape to physically build up the letter, as exemplified by Bozeman's M. There are also painted letters, so that's especially prevalent down in the Southwest on rock formations. Schools, high schools, universities paint their letters onto rock formations, and then also cutting letters out of vegetation on slopes as well. So M is reflective of one of those main designs, the Western designs. Carter also talked about whitewashing. So MSC students wanted to construct this letter, but they also wanted to make it stand out, make it a stark white contrast to Mount Baldy's slope. So at the time, they would whitewash it. We can see some headlines from the exponent here, and we also have this great photo from 1925 of students working on the letter. So yeah, through a mixture of lime and water, they would achieve that stark white color. Now, recent years, 1972, we've got people working on it. This is from 2009. With the M restoration project, they've transitioned to using acrylic paint to paint the M. But what's important when it comes to going up, painting the M, or M work days that have happened throughout the years, it's that every year students, sometimes multiple times a year, go up to the M and participate in this social tradition of building the M, but it's also participating in the design of the M itself. So through this social connection, through this physical connection by constructing the M, the students have a connection to those who built it in 1915. So when the M was built in 1915, MSC students at the time were proud of their diligence and labor, and they claimed it was the biggest letter in the West. But in actuality, the biggest letter in the West was Y-Rock at BYU. The students at BYU built that in 1906. So while it wasn't the biggest letter in the West, I will say it is the biggest letter in the state of Montana, and for the sake of rivalry, I have to throw that in, that it is bigger than UM's M. So yes, I had to throw that in there. But it's an important symbol of Western history, Montana history there. So we've got hillside letters in Montana kind of expanding outward. The first hillside letter in Montana was UM, I will admit that, we have to say that, built 1909. And then we also have Montana School of Mines, their M. If you look, you can see it says Beat MSC under it. It's Beat MS Montana State University. So super interesting picture there. Other hillside letters in the state of Montana, talking about how hillside letters are an identifier for Montana, local communities, high schools. We've got the L in Missoula for Loyola High School, the GF in Great Falls for the community, and then the D in Drubbin for the community as well as the high school. Hillside letters in the West. We've got a map here you can see. These are all the hillside letters in the West, or in the country, excuse me. They're about 500. Most of them are concentrated in the West. Here are some examples. We've got Block U at University of Utah, built 1907, and Y-Rock, which I mentioned, built 1906. So these are both representative of other hillside letters in the West that are connected to MSU's M. And then also we want to point out, we've got the Hollywood sign here, this sign, South San Francisco, the industrial city. These are also hillside letters. They're more geoglyphs, but they are important factors on the landscape, showing a connection of culture as well as environment. That has a lot to do with this design of hillside letters in the West, because the environment influences how they're put onto the mountain slopes. Here, just a final slide. I put UM's M, MSU's M. They're both beautiful. this lovely quote by Jim Parsons, who was a professor at the school with the first hillside letter, University of California, Berkeley, writes, "The letter on the mountain is a subject without a literature. However, for travelers in the arid west, the letters are anchors to the eye, adding diversity and interest to the natural beauty of the landscape." So we found through this project the M is significant, obviously, for its social and cultural reasons, but as well as its design, it's connected to a larger Western movement. Here's a photo from our spring field trip from last year. You can see M's still there. It still has its integrity in its structure, as well as its integrity in its traditions that we have here at the school. So to wrap up, we just wanted to do a few acknowledgments. Thanks to the editors of our project, to the staff at MSU's library, special collections, and as well as the rest of our classmates. Yes, that is me with my eyes closed, front and center of this photo. And also Dr. Janet Orr, happy retirement. Thank you for everything. So.